Hi students. So coming to our next chapter, time of supply. And time of supply simply is relating to the point of time based on which tax liability is arised. Because in case of supply of goods or in case of supply of services, there are number of events we have like date of purchase order, date of agreement, a date of supply of goods, a date of issue of invoice, a date of advance payment, a date of the remaining payments, a date of receipt of goods by the recipient, etc. At what point of time the tax liability arises, and based on what date the tax liability is computed, and that is said to be about time of supply. And remember, the time of supply does not specify the due date for payment of tax and due date for filing the return. But the due date for payment of tax is calculated based on the time of supply. It provides the base for calculation of the due date for payment of tax or filing the return. And in this session, we cover section 12, 13, 14, and 31 also. 31 is simply relating to the last date for raising the invoice, and 12 and 13 is relating to the time of supply in case of supply of goods and in case of supply of services. So this 12, 13 and 31 we covered. We have in our CMA Inter syllabus, but section 14 you covered only in CA final or CMA final. So time of supply in case of change in rate of tax. Change in rate of tax. Okay. So section 12 is relating to supply of goods, time of supply in case of supply of goods. Section 13 is relating to time of supply in case of supply of services. 14 is relating to time of supply is in case of a change in rate of tax. What will be the time of supply? Okay. So simply time of supply is nothing but the date based on which the tax liability arises is said to be about time of supply. Okay. Then coming to the first one, in case of supply of goods under forward charge mechanism, supply of goods under forward charge mechanism. So it is covered under section 12.2. The time of supply is nothing but the date of invoice or the due date for issue of invoice under section 31 or date of receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. And first of all, in case of forward charge mechanism, we computed time of supply from the point of view of the supplier, not from the point of view of the recipient. So from the point of view of the supplier, what is the time of supply? Date of issue of invoice or last date for raising the invoice as per section 31 or the date of receipt of payment, whichever is earlier, okay. So here what is meant by the last date for raising the invoice is provided here, the due date for raising the invoice. And in case of goods involving movement of the goods, so goods which involve supply, which involving movement of the goods, the last date for raising the invoice is nothing but on or before the time of removal of the product, on or before the time of removal of the goods. And it means simply is nothing but the date on which the movement of the goods has been started, and on that day or before that day we have to raise the invoice. If the goods are not involving in movement of the goods, no goods supply which is not involving the movement of the goods, and it simply is nothing but you book the goods through the AC work, then the party deliver the product at your premises directly, and those supply does not involving any movement. In that case, the time of supply will be on or before the time of delivery of the goods are making available to the recipient. On what date that goods have been delivered to you, or the date on which the goods available to you. And another one, if the supply is covered under reverse charge mechanism, in case of goods, supply covered under reverse charge mechanism, the time of supply is the date of receipt of goods from the person, so not registered under the act, the date on which that goods have been received. And here special case is that the goods sent on sale or approval basis or sale or removal basis, the time of supply is nothing but on or before when the supply becomes it becomes known that supply has been taken place, or 6 months from the date of approval. And simply is nothing but the date on which the transaction is deemed to be a sale, or 6 months from the date of removal from the supplier, whichever is earlier. Because in case of sale or approval, and when we consider the transaction as a supply, only if the approval get from the recipient, or if no approval received before the no approval or no rejection received, no intimation received before the due date, whether he accepted or not. If any activity done by the party by way of accepting the product, if any of these three activities happen, then that transaction is deemed to be a supply. So the date on which the transaction known to be the supply, or 6 months from the date of removal, whichever is earlier, is said to be a last date for raising the invoice in case of supply of goods, say goods sent on sale or removal basis. And the last one, in case of continuous supply of goods. What is meant by continuous supply of goods? Continuous supply of goods means what? Supply of goods which is provided or will be provided continuously or on recurring basis, where the payments have been received on installment basis. Where the payments are received on an installment basis are said to be about continuous supply of services. Continuous supply of goods. And in case of continuous supply of goods, what is the last date for raising the invoice? The last date for raising the invoice is depends upon whether the payment is linked to the account statement or not. If the payment is linked to the account statement, then on or before the issue of the account statement, the invoice has to be raised. Otherwise, on or before the payment receipt, on or before the each payment is treated as a last date for raising the invoice. For example, account statement has been sent by the party quarterly once. Quarterly once. For example, that party is supplying the water bubbles to you on recurring basis as per the contract, and we are making the payment on installment basis. And that party providing the accounting statement on quarterly basis, but on estimation basis at the end of every month you are making some payment. For example, in the first month you paid so 10,000, second month 10,000, and coming to the third month you get the account statement, and you get the account statement, you get the statement for 32,000 rupee. Out of the 32, you already make the payment of 10 plus 10, 20,000 you already paid. But 20,000 is not linked to the account statement. Irrespective of that, you are already make the payment. So the date of payment is said to be last date for raising the invoice in that case. But here, after getting the account statement, the excess amount you're required to pay. So here, that excess amount 12,000 you are paying is linked to the account statement. There, the last date for raising the invoice is nothing but what? The date of on or before the issue of the accounting statement, account statement. Okay. So this is relating to what? Last date for raising the invoice in case of supply of goods under section 31 of CGST Act 2017. So if the supply involving movement of the goods, then last date for raising the invoice is nothing but on or before the time for removal of the product. The supply is not involving movement of the goods, on or before delivery of the goods, or when the goods available for utilization. And in case of supply of goods under reverse charge mechanism, on or before receipt of the goods by recipient. And in case of sale of say goods sent on sale or removal basis, in that case, the date on which that supply, the transaction is deemed to be a taken place, or 6 months from the date of removal of the product, whichever is earlier. In case of continuous supply of the goods, so if it is linked to the account statement, the on or before the account statement, otherwise on or before the payment received. So we have to raise the invoice. Okay, clear? So this is the due date. So in case of supply of goods and a forward charge mechanism, what is the time of supply? Date of issue of invoice, or last date for raising the invoice as per section 31, or date of receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. Whichever is earlier. And here, date of receipt of payment means what? You have to define it from the point of view of what? Supplier only. Remember that point. Here, the date of receipt of payment is nothing but the date on which entry for payment is recorded in the books of the supplier. Date on which entry for payment recorded in the books of the supplier, or date on which amount is credited in the bank account of the supplier. The one is date on which entry for payment is recorded in the books of the supplier, or date on which amount credited in the bank account of the supplier, whichever is earlier is said to be a date of receipt of payment. And in case of supply of goods, so other than composite dealer, and remember this provision is not applied in case of composite dealer and the supply of a specified actionable supplier of specified actionable claims. And what about this provision? And this provision is relating to the advance payment. Advance payment. So in case of advance payment, supply time of supply is nothing but date of invoice or due date for raising the invoice, whichever is earlier. Date of invoice or due date for raising the invoice, whichever is earlier. And it means in case of the supplier of the goods other than composite dealer and supplier of a specified actionable claim, the advance payments are not taxed on receipt basis. Advance, in case of advance payment, time of supply is calculated based on two events only. One is the date of issue of invoice or date of last date for raising the invoice as per section 31. Means in case of composite dealer, advance payment is taxed on receipt basis. There the time of supply is date of receipt of payment. In case of supplier of specified actionable claim also, time of supply for advance payment is date of receipt of such goods. So date of receipt of such payment. Okay. So clear. Next. So this is about what forward charge mechanism. And remember, in case of forward charge mechanism, if these events are not available and practically not possible to calculate time of supply, then we apply section 12.5, nothing but residual entry. What was the residual entry? Section 12.5 clearly says if the party is required to file the return, the due date for filing the return is the time of supply. Otherwise, the due date, the date on which GST paid is said to be a time of supply. Next, coming to the reverse charge mechanism, and we discussed about forward charge mechanism under section 12.2, and coming to the reverse charge mechanism, section 12. So relating to the supply of goods. So the time of supply here is nothing but what? Time of supply is date on which goods received or date of payment or 31st day from the date of issue of invoice, whichever is earlier. And remember, this is we calculated from the point of view of recipient, not from the point of view of supplier. So the time of supply in case of goods supplied on reverse charge mechanism is nothing but date on which goods received or date of payment or 31st day from the date of issue of invoice, whichever is earlier, is said to be a time of supply. And here what is meant by date of payment? Here the date of payment is defined from the point of view of the recipient, not from the point of view of the supplier. So date of payment is nothing but date on which entry for payment recorded in the books of the recipient or date on which amount is debited in the bank account of the recipient. In the bank account, sorry. In the bank account of the recipient, whichever is earlier. In the bank account of the recipient, whichever is earlier. Okay. And so the time of supply in case of RCM is nothing but what? Date on which goods are received or date of payment or 31st day from the date of issue of invoice by the supplier, whichever is earlier. And if the provision is not possible, if the above provision is not possible to calculate, the time of supply is nothing but what? Date on which entry for receipt of supply is recorded in the books of recipient. And it means simply nothing but date on which entry for supply recorded in the books of the recipient is said to be a time of supply. So section 12.2 is relating to supply of goods under forward charge mechanism. Section 12.3 is relating to supply of goods under reverse charge mechanism. Okay. Next, coming to the supply of services under forward charge and reverse charge. And supply in case of supply of services, so it covered under section 30. Time of supply in case of supply of services. 13.2 is relating to forward charge mechanism. 13.3 is relating to reverse charge mechanism. And before that, what is the due date for raising the invoice in case of supply of services as per section 31 we'll discuss. Okay. The time for issue of invoice in case of services. So if you're a registered person supplying the taxable services, registered person supplying the taxable services, the due date for raising the invoice is nothing but on or before before or after provision of the services, on or before or after provision of the services, but within how many days? 30 days from the date of supply of services. Within 30 days from the date of supply of services, that invoice has to be raised. That invoice has to be raised. And that in case of insurer, banking company or financial institutions, including NBFC, the 30 days is replaced with what? 45 days. Means in case of banks or financial institutes or insurance companies, they can raise the invoice within 45 days from the date of supply of that services. Okay. And next, in case of continuous supply of service, what is meant by continuous supply of service? Here is the definition. So it means supply of services which is provided or will be provided continuously for a period of more than 3 months. For a period of more than 3 months with under a contract with periodical payment obligation. With periodical payment obligation, those are said to be about continuous supply of service. And it means the services are supplied continuously under a contract for a period exceeding 3 months, subjected to the receipt of payment on installment basis, is said to be a continuous supply of service. So in case of continuous supply of service, when the due date for payment can be identified, if the due date is mentioned in the contract, then the due date for payment is said to be a last date for raising the invoice. Otherwise, if the due date is not mentioned, then what is the time of supply? The actual date of receipt of the payment is said to be a time of supply. Actual date of receipt of the payment is said to be a time of supply. And the supplier of the service ceased under the contract before the completion of the supply, then the time of supply is nothing but when the supply ceases. When the supply ceases, on or before the ceasing of the respected supply is the time of supply. And there is a special case if the supply made in between an insurer or banking company or financial institute, including NBFC, or a telecom operator or any other class of the supplier of services as may be notified by government on the recommendation of the council, making the taxable services between the distinct two persons. And remember, between the supply must be made between the distinct two person. So as per section 1, section 25 says what? Definition for distinct two person. And the time of supply is nothing but what? Before or at the time of such supplier record the same in his books of account, or before the expiry of the quarter during which that supply was made, whichever is earlier. So the time of supply will be on or before the supplier recording the same in his books of account, or before the expiry of the quarter in which that supply has been made. The supply has been made. This is said to be our time of supply. And remember, this special case is applied only in case of specified suppliers like insurers, bankers, and telecom operators, or any other special class notified by GST Council. And second point, that supply should be made between the distinct two person. Then this is the provision. Time of supply is on or before the supplier recording that same in his books of account, or before the expiry of the quarter in which that supply has been made. And this is the last date for issue of tax invoice in case of supply of services as per section 31 of CGST Act 2017. Then coming to here, section 13. So in case of forward charge mechanism, so section 13.2 is that the time of supply depends upon whether invoice has been raised under within section 31 or after section 31, means within the due date or beyond the due date. If the invoice has been raised within the due date, the time of supply is nothing but the date of issue of invoice or date of payment, whichever is earlier. Date of issue of invoice or date of payment, whichever is earlier. And if the invoice is not issued within the due date, then the time of supply is date of completion of service or date of payment, whichever is earlier. Whichever is earlier. So remember, if the invoice issued within due date, then date of issue of invoice or date of payment, whichever is earlier. If the invoice is not issued within the due date of completion of service or date of payment, whichever is earlier. Okay. Then, and remember, in case of advance payments, so the time of supply is date of payment. The time of supply is date of payment. In case of supply of services, separate provision is not there for advance payment. So advance payments are always taxed on receipt basis. Nothing but time of supply is date of payment. And in case of reverse charge mechanism, we always think from the point of view of the recipient. And time of supply is nothing but what? Date of payment or 61st day from the date of issue of invoice by the supplier. So what? Date of payment. What is meant by date of payment? Already we discussed under section 13.2. So 13.3. So date of payment is nothing but what? Date on which entry for payment recorded in the books of recipient, or date on which amount debited in the books of the in the bank account of the recipient, whichever is early. So date of payment or 61st day from the date of issue of invoice by the supplier, whichever is earlier is said to be a time of supply. But there is a special case in case of importation of services between associated enterprise. And we have to get these services from the associated enterprise who is located outside India. Who is located outside. Supplier is located outside India, recipient is located in India, and both are the associated enterprises. Then the time of supply is date of payment for service, or date on which entry for that service recorded in the books of recipient. Date of payment for service, or date on which entry for the respected service recorded in the books of recipient, whichever is earlier, is said to be a time of supply. The above provisions are not possible to calculate the time of supply. Then time of supply is nothing but date on which entry for supply recorded in the books of the recipient. Okay, so this is about supply of goods or supply of services under forward charge mechanism, under reverse charge mechanism. And coming to the some more provisions, we have survey provisions relating to the voucher, and provisions residual entry, and additional payment received in the form of interest, or any late fee or delayed payment, etc. In these cases, the time of supply concept is common for supply of goods as well as supply of services. And in case of voucher is simply is nothing but it is an instrument which is considered as a part payment for consideration, or full payment for consideration. Simply it is treated as a part of the consideration, part of the consideration. And if the vouchers, what is the time of supply in case of the voucher? At the time of issuing the voucher, you need to check one point, whether the supply is identifiable or not. For example, if the employer provide a pizza voucher, pizza coupons to the employees, then by using the pizza coupon, they can purchase the pizza only. And we can identify which is going to be purchased by using that coupon. So, and here the supply is identifiable. If the supply is identifiable at the time of issue of the voucher, then time of supply is nothing but what? Date of issue of that voucher. Date of issue of that voucher. Otherwise, the time of supply is nothing but date of redemption of the voucher. For example, in case of food coupons, by using the food coupons, you may purchase anything in that outlet. You may purchase the food, or you may purchase the provisions also. So that supply is not identifiable at the time of issuing the voucher. In that case, the time of supply is nothing but date of redemption of that voucher. Redemption of that voucher means what? And by taking the food coupon, and you go to the respected outlet after 1 month, and you purchase the provision, at the time of making the payment, you submitted the voucher to that party. Then after reduction of that voucher amount, the remaining amount you are able to pay. On what date the voucher has been redeemed, that is said to be a time of supply. Okay, so even in case of supply of services, also same provision. So whether supply is identifiable at the time of issue of voucher or not. If it is identifiable, time of supply is the date of issue of voucher, otherwise the date of redemption of the voucher. Next. And if section 12.2, 12.3, 12.4 and 12.4 are not possible to calculate time of supply, then residual case section 12.5 is applied. And if section 13.2, 13.3, 13.4 not possible, then section 13.5 is applied. So here the section 12.5, 13.5 is relating to what? Residual case. In case of residual case, what is the time of supply? Whether the periodical returns are required to be filed by the supplier, then time of supply is nothing but due date for filing the return. If the returns are not required to be filed, then time of supply is nothing but the date on which GST is paid. Date on which GST is paid is said to be our time of supply. If the party required to file the periodical return, the due date for filing the return is the time of supply. Otherwise, the date on which GST has been paid to the government is said to be a time of supply. And coming to the section 12.6 and 13.6, it is relating to what? For example, you supply the goods to the recipient, to the buyer, and that party unable to make the payment in time, and as per the contract, and that party required to pay some additional amount to you in the form of interest or late fee or delayed payment, delayed charges, etc. And for that additional payment, what is the time of supply here? First of all, for coming to the value of supply, we covered under section 12.2 or 13.2 or 12.3 or 13.3. Pure depends upon whether it is forward charge or reverse charge. But here we are not talking about the value. We are not talking about the actual supply. We are talking about any additional payment. Any additional payment we received because of delay in payment. Nothing but interest, late fee or delayed charges. For that additional payment, what is the time of supply? The date on which supplier receives such additional payment. The date on which supplier receives such additional payment is simply is nothing but what? Time of supply. So this is about 12.6 and 13.6. Okay. So these are relating to section 12 and 13. Okay. And here we discussed a forward charge mechanism under section 12 to 13 to, and supply of goods and supply of services. But here one more additional point is there. So, and this additional point is applied in case of both the supply of goods as well as and supply of services. Supply of goods and supply of services. And for example, while making the payment, actually your billing amount is around 10,500, but you make the payment 11,000 rupees, and the excess amount you paid 500 is the up to the 10,500 section 12 to 13.2 is applied, or so those will be applied. But that additional payment you made 500 is the, and in case of that 500, what is the time of supply? The time of supply simply is nothing but date of issue of invoice, and this is purely at the option of the supplier, at the option of the supplier. And remember, this option is available only when the value additional amount, when the additional amount is up to 1,000. If the additional amount exceeds 1,000, then this provision is not applied. Okay. Next, so this is so 12.3, 13.3 reverse charge mechanism and voucher related cases and others. And one more point, this is applied only for final and change in tax rate in respect of supply of service. And remember, section 14 is applied in case of supply of services and in case of a composition scheme and specified actionable claims only. Supply of services and supply of goods in case of composition scheme and specified actionable claims. So there are two things are there. If the supply is provided before the change in rate, if the supply is provided before the change in rate, what is the time of supply? The date of issue of invoice or date of receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. Whichever is earlier. If the supply is completed before the change in rate, the time of supply is date of invoice or date of payment, whichever is earlier. But if the supply is provided after the change in rate, supply is provided after the change in rate, and both events, invoice date and payment date, both are happened before the change in rate. So remember, listen carefully. If the supply is provided after the change in rate, but invoice and payment are happened before the change in rate, then time of supply is date of payment or date of invoice, whichever is less. Date of payment or date of invoice, whichever is less. And the third one, if the supply is made after the change in rate, but invoice date, any one of the invoice date or payment date happened before the change in rate, and one is before and one is after. Invoice date is before and payment date is after, or invoice date is after, payment date is before. In that case, the time of supply simply is nothing but date of invoice or date of payment, whichever is later, simply is nothing but among these two, whichever is happened after the change in rate, that will be the time of supply. That will be the time of supply. Okay. So three parameters we consider: completion of service, and invoice date, payment date. If the supply is made before the change in rate, time of supply is invoice date or payment date, whichever is earlier. The supply is provided after the change in rate, but invoice and payment both are happened before. The time of supply is payment or invoice, whichever is earlier. But if the supply is made after the change in rate, but any one of the date happened and both dates are happened, one is before, one is after, then time of supply is payment date or invoice date, whichever is later. And in this case, and especially this provision is applied only in case of section 14. Date of payment means what? Date of receipt of payment is date of credit in the bank account of the supplier if the credit is made after 4 working days from the effective date from which rate of tax has been changed. So if the credit is made after 4 working days from the effective date on which rate of tax has been changed. Otherwise, the date of payment is nothing but regular definition, and date of entry for payment is made in the books of supplier or date on which amount is credited in the bank account of the supplier, whichever is earlier. And this is about section 14, change in rate of tax. And this is purely applied in case of supply of services and in case of composition scheme and specified actionable claims only. And clarification on time of supply for services under hybrid annuity model. In case of hybrid annuity model, we are providing both the construction as well as maintenance services continuously. So it is treated as a what continuous supply of this service. In case of continuous supply of service, as it is a service, so the time of supply is calculated as if the invoice is raised on or before the specified date or completion of the event, on or before the specified date or completion of the event, then time of supply is nothing but date of issue of invoice or date of receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. If the invoice is not raised within the due date, the time of supply is nothing but date of completion of service or date of receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. Okay, and here we are making the payment on installment basis, which is inclusive of what? Interest. But interest component is clearly specified in the agreement itself, so it is also forming part of the value of the supply as per section 15(2) of CGST Act. Okay, so this is purely relating to what? Time of supply. Okay, I hope you guys understood. Okay, thank you.